God at work. Many of us don't take enough time to stop and search for it. We get caught up in our ideas, our initiatives, the most recent cause we can support. But we don't take time to recognize that God is already at work all over the world, and that He's inviting us to join Him. God has been on the scene way before you and I even knew what the problem was, and joining Him to do His work, whether through a relief project or a restorative relationship, is absolutely crucial. But how do we put this into practice? What does this mean for me? What does this mean for you? What does this mean for all of us in our everyday life? My name is Jonathan Meisner, and I'm a documentary filmmaker. I've captured and shared stories of people and communities from all over the world. And along the way, I've learned a lot as well. These people have helped me rethink and reshape the way I think about poverty in our world. And I'm realizing it hits a lot closer to home than I'd like to admit. Poverty actually involves every single one of us. And it's crucial that we know just how significant of a role we all play in this situation. So let's dive in and begin to redefine poverty.
Throughout this entire series, we're talking about the issue of poverty and our response as Christian to that issue. If you remember, we actually started out this series by redefining the word poverty and what it means. Most of us tend to think about the word poverty as a lack of money or a lack of material things, and while that's true in some cases, that's not all of it. Poverty is rooted in broken relationships. And there's brokenness in you, and there's brokenness in me. We all have brokenness. We all have some sense of poverty in our lives. And until we learn to focus our efforts on alleviating poverty from a relational standpoint, our efforts might actually hurt people rather than help them. Poverty is rooted in broken relationships. We also looked at the two different approaches we as Christians can take when it comes to the poverty issue. There's relief and there's restoration. If you remember, relief is a short and it's quick, temporary response to a crisis situation in someone's life. When a fire maybe takes out their house or a flood hits a community, our response should be that of relief. But most people aren't in that crisis situation. Most people don't need relief. What most people need, what we all need, is restoration. Remember, since poverty is rooted in broken relationships, it's all of us working together to become more what God has called us to be. And it's not so much about projects or initiatives, it's more about a process. God wants to use us in a process to change us and to change those that we help. It's all about restoration. Now, I know a lot of you might be thinking, Jonathan, that sounds great and everything, but what does that mean for me? I want to start doing something today. I'm glad you've asked. There's a few things that we can keep in mind as we move forward to really start engaging in restorative, relational approaches to poverty. The first one for us to keep in mind is that God is at work. He's already at work, and our job is to find where He's at work and join Him. How do we know He's at work? How do we know He's at work all over the world? Well, we can see He's been at work since the dawn of time. In fact, David writes about this in Psalm 139. He says, I can never escape from your spirit. I can never get away from your presence. He's saying God is everywhere. No matter where I turn to, you're there. That's a good thing. God's at work everywhere. I can ask the darkness to hide me and the light around me to become light. But even in the darkness, I can't hide from you. Light can't even escape God. God is everywhere at work, and our first job as Christians is to find where He's at work and join Him. Find where God is doing good things in our communities around the world and join with Him. And there's two things we can do to join with Him. The first thing we can do at a local level is start building relationships. Locally, we want to build relationships. That means there are people that God has placed in your schools, in your churches, in your community that you can start to actually build relationships with because you know them. There might be someone in your school that has been struck by a crisis situation and they need relief. It's a great opportunity for you to offer relief. Or there could be someone that has experienced the loss of a family member and they need some comfort and some help. That can be you. You can actually begin to build relationships locally in your schools, in your church, in your communities to start making a difference. Globally, we can support relationships. What that means is while we may not know the people around the world that need our help personally, we can't go to them and build long-lasting relationships with them. But what we can do are support people that are local. Support people, support churches, support organizations that are working on the ground that are making a big difference through a restorative relational approach. Locally, we want to build relationships. Globally, we want to support relationships. Those two things are going to allow us to actively be engaged in where God is working around the world. We're going to be able to find where God's at work and we're going to be able to join Him. The second thing we need to keep in mind when it comes to helping people is this. It's not about what we have, it's about what God wants. It's not about us, it's about God. John chapter 15 actually says this. It says, I am the vine. This is God, this is Jesus talking. It says, I am the vine and you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. But apart from me, you can do nothing. You see, when our efforts and our hearts and our mission align with that of God's and not necessarily of our own agendas, we bear much fruit. Apart from Him, we can do nothing. But with Him, we can do tremendously more than we could ever ask, think, or imagine because we have the power of Him working in us. Stay connected to Him. Stay connected to His calling, to His purpose, and not necessarily what we want to accomplish, and we'll see much more done in alleviating the poverty issue and helping people around the world. There's actually a beautiful story in John chapter 6 that illustrates what we're talking about perfectly. Jesus and His disciples are met by a crowd of thousands of people. And this is where it starts, picking up with verse 5. It says, when Jesus looked up and saw the great crowd coming towards Him, He said to Philip, where shall we buy bread for these people to eat? He saw that they had a need. They were hungry. He said, what should we do? This is really interesting. He asked this only to test Him. For He, Jesus, already had in mind what He was going to do. Jesus knew how to solve the problem, but He asked Philip to be a part of the process. He asked Philip to come along and be a part of the process of helping these people. Jesus already knew. That's huge. Philip answered him, it would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one of us to have a bite. It's going to take a ridiculous amount of resources, a whole lot of work to help these people. Another one of His disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. Here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will they go among so many? You see what happened there? There was a small boy that had a little bit there, and they said, well, this is all that we have. Jesus is really not going to feed everybody that's there. Here's the magic. Jesus said, have the people sit down. There's plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed it to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. When they had all had enough to eat, they said to His disciples, gather up the pieces that are left over and let nothing be wasted. Did you catch that? Did you catch the miracle that just took place? There was a small boy that all he had was 5 loaves and 2 fish to feed thousands. I don't know about you, that would not have even fed my entire family very well. We're pretty hungry. But Jesus took the small amount that we had and not only met the need, He exceeded the need. Everybody was fed and there were leftovers. The same is true when we approach our work to helping people around the world by not just doing our own things, but joining up with where God is already at work. He's able to take the small amounts of gifts and abilities that we have, and He's able to not only meet people's needs, He's able to exceed their needs and do immeasurably more than we could ask, think, or imagine. So as we all move forward in taking a relational approach to alleviating poverty, there's 4 things that we can do to make a difference. And it all starts with our mind, our mouth, our hands, and our heart. It starts in our mind by educating ourselves on the issues that are going on in our local communities and around the world. Educating on what are some of these issues that are taking place that I can be a part of, whether it's in a relief context or in a restoration type context. It starts in our mind. The next thing we can use is our mouth. We can use that to let people know about the issues that are going on in our local communities and around the world, by letting them know about churches that are doing things that are good, by letting them know organizations that are doing good works, and allowing us to be really banner wavers for the work that God is doing in and around the world. Use our mouth to let people know. From there, we move to our hands, and that's where we actually roll up our sleeves and get a little bit dirty. We involve ourselves in restorative relationships that both change the people that we're helping and change ourselves. Both of us working together, bringing our gifts and our abilities to become more like what God has called us to be. We use our hands and we get dirty. And finally, we use our heart, because we know that nothing can be accomplished without God. We first have to find where God is at work and then join Him. We do that through prayer. God changes us through prayer. God, what are the things that you're doing? What are the things you want me to care about? What are the things that you want me to want? God changes us through prayer. It all starts in our mind and goes to our mouth, our hands, and then our heart. So that's it. With all of this information, with all of these new ideas, there's one thing that we always need to keep in mind, and that's God and His work around the world. God is at work around the world. Our job is just to find where it's taking place and join Him. The only question now is, will you?